This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
This is Ray Sobbs from the UnX Network, and you're listening to Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
You're listening to the UnX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. I'm Cristina Gomez on the Paradigm Shifts channel and on the X, the new mainstream KUNX digital broadcasting talk radio. Are you ready for this? Because we're about to embark on an hour and a half of UFO shenanigans and paranormal adventures. Right here is where we look and think outside the proverbial box. We jump down those rabbit holes where you get a red Tic Tac instead of a red pill. First off, make sure you subscribe and share these shows on social media to those who you think are having their minds and eyes open to the reality of the UFO mystery. All of these shows are great primers, and in the push for more clarity, transparency, and disclosure, the more voices demanding answers, the better. For those listening on KUNX Talk Radio and affiliates, I have two other shows each week that only air on my YouTube channel. Mysteries with a History is on Thursdays at 2:30 p.m. PST with my co-host Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio on KUNX, and each week we cover a different topic in depth. And on Fridays at 3 p.m. PST, the show Strange Paradigms is where I and a different guest co-host cover all the strange weekly news and mysterious headlines from around the world. So definitely check out my website, strangeparadigms.com, for show archives, more information, and direct video links to my channel. Let's get into some unusual news from this last week. In late April of 2022, the world of breakfast foods got rocked by the announcement of a new cereal by Tropicana, the famous orange juice brand, creating a cereal to be eaten with orange juice and not milk. And it launched on May 4th. Have you seen it in stores yet? I mean, would you buy it? Would you eat their honey almond cereal with orange juice? Look, I'm not a big juice drinker. I'll drink orange juice from time to time, but it isn't a must-have for me when it comes to the breakfast table. Like, I don't really need it. In other news, do you want a job studying the UFO phenomenon? Well, the Office of the U.S. Director for National Intelligence, the ODNI, posted job vacancies for Senior Analysis Lead and Collection Lead in the Department of Defense's Airborne Object Identification Management Synchronization Group, better known as AOI-MSG. The job openings came part of the government's attempt to take the issue of unexplained and mysterious objects seen flying around the military airspace more seriously. However, unfortunately, if you're not already working in the U.S. intelligence community and holding an active top secret or SCI clearance, you need not apply. Even then, you might be too late. To find out all the details, go over to the debrief website written by Tim McMillan. With the news out of the way, let me talk about my guest. Nathaniel Gillis is a demonologist who has been studying the field for the last 20 years. His research has taken him in areas that he did not expect at first. He's often quoted for his concept of the demonic, and that is the reason they are playing by different rules is because they're playing a different game. Nathaniel has sought to redefine the nature of haunting phenomena, ghosts, aliens, demons, and other experiences of high strangeness. Nathaniel, welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. How are you?
Doing very well, doing very well. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be with you. It's going to be a great show.
Thank you for being here. For the last 20 years of research, you have begun to define it as preternatural epiphenomenal philosophy. What does that mean to you, and what does that title entail?
Well, it's predicated on it's predicated on how most people do paranormal research. So my background was in the paranormal field. And what a lot of researchers were doing is they were going in and they were recording an event. They would say it's a presence or a demon, and we really did not know whether or not what we were recording was an event or if it was a secondary consequence to an event. And so throughout history, the problem with studying demonology as a manifestation is it the entity itself, or is it a presence, or is it like a secondary consequence of its presence? So whenever I lecture, I kind of tell a story about a person that steps into a pool of water, and I say that researchers are on the other end of the pool. And so a lot of people will sit there and study the wake of the water without studying the individual that created the wake in the water, if that makes sense. And so a lot of what we do in the paranormal field is we're studying the waves. We're not studying the entity itself. And so that's really where I centered that field of research around.
So then, if the majority of people are studying the waves, but I guess not the foundation, how can someone change their perspective to look at the bigger picture?
Well, it's very difficult because we have to define again, is it the entity itself? It's just like when I was growing up in a haunted house, there was a certain amount of fear that I felt in the presence of the entity that I was being haunted by. And so as a child, what I had to define was, okay, am I fearful based upon my human emotions because I don't know what that entity is? Or is it literally projecting fear upon me? Was it a fabricated fear? And so I think that as researchers, we're stumped because we're looking for an identification of an organic nature. Where is it coming from? Why is it here? And how am I perceiving it? And how's my body responding to it? And I think that's where my research is centered around, but I think it's very important. Like I said, especially like if we're working in a paranormal field, we don't know yet if we're measuring waves or if we're measuring the entity itself. So is it the event or is it the entity? Is it a secondary consequence of the entity being in our presence, or is it literally the entity itself? And I think that was one of the motivations to propel me into defining a demon, understanding what it is, and whether or not I was, what exactly I was studying, basically. I hope that makes sense.
So you mentioned that you lived in a haunted house. Is that how you got started in the research of demonology, or how did you get drawn to this type of topic?
Yeah, so when I was 8 years old, my parents moved into a house in Dayton, Ohio. And I remember going to the open house, like where you take a tour and everything. And my dad led me by the hand into my future room. And as I was looking around, I felt compelled to get on my hands and knees and look underneath the bed that was in the corner of the room. And when I did, I was met face to face with a full-bodied apparition of a little girl. She was maybe about my age, a little bit younger. And she had long black hair. And it was very strange. There was a presence in the room itself. And there's a lot to take in as an 8-year-old boy. So when I lived in that house, I moved into that house, that entity mutated from a little girl into a shadow figure. I saw it's literally a shadow figure. It was outside of my window at nighttime. And it just, it evolved and it mutated at the same time. So by the time I left that house, I had a firm grip on whatever it is haunted me, in the sense of, hey, listen, it terrified me. I don't understand what it was. I know what I saw. And, that's really been what led me into this field, understanding it. And what's really interesting is while I was going through what I was going through in that house, I was attending a local church. And so I was taking my experiences to my church leaders, to my youth pastor, and saying, hey guys, I'm experiencing something that does not fit the blueprint of demonology that you've taught me. And so, I was really kind of pestering them with questions, and they really had no answers for me. So that's when I realized that there are certain aspects of demonology that falls apart when you compare it to ancient literature. And so as I grew into new dimensions of thought in my research, in my field, I had to let go of a lot of dogma and I had to embrace the data. The data is really what we're after. And so that's, like I said, that's really what got me into this field. And that was my inspiration to study demonology.
And with all the research you've done, I think that maybe the term demonology might have changed for you over the years. So
Right.
today, what does demonology mean to you?
Well, I think it's been hijacked by the Vatican. And I'm not just the Vatican, but the idea that, okay, demons are fallen angels. And so when people say that, what they're doing is they're projecting a modern term on an ancient phenomenon. So, first of all, the fallen angel is a very misunderstood term. The earliest texts regarding the fallen aspect of an angel are found in Ugaritic ritual bowls, where we have an ancient word called as malakuma. And malakuma meant deceased ancestor. It wasn't until Hebrew culture, it's in Hebrew theology, they retranslated that into malakim, into angel, or in a sense of some divine being. And so our earliest interpretations of fallen angels was not horns and hooves of Greek mythology or even your apocalyptic literature. It was quite literally a mutated ghost. And so that's where the earliest texts lead us. And so what I always found my research, the fact that we're dealing with a consciousness here. And if we're dealing with consciousness, then we need to start looking at what the origin of this consciousness. Is it disembodied? Has it ever been earthborn? Or is it earthbound? Is it a ghost? And so that's what really, I'll tell you what, that's what changed my idea of demonology, because it really fit the blueprint of what's written in the Bible. Once you get that foundation, a lot of this stuff makes sense to me. And it's quite controversial because a lot of people, they like to fit this phenomenon into the Catholic definition of the demon or the Judaism and mythologies and stuff. I think that we're looking at all the above, but we're looking at it through different lenses throughout history. That's when my demonological terms and research evolved. Again, it's not what the Vatican says it is. They don't have the authority to say that. So we have to look at how these terms evolved throughout history. And we need to start focusing on not just the names and titles, but the behavioral patterns. It's like the bloody footprints at a crime scene. You can't ignore them. You know they're there. And so that's what kind of led me into taking the face off of the phenomenon and looking at it for what it is.
And when you take off those labels, when you're looking at all the different stories, or I guess in the sense data, if you take them all away, do demons have any other similarities with maybe different types of phenomena?
Absolutely. I think we're looking at the same phenomenon. We're looking at the same strand. Okay, these are not dichotomies, they're dualities. So, like, if we get into ancient literature, we have different entities that our ancestors recorded. And if we take, like I said, the face off the phenomenon, what we realize is that these are the same beings that allowed themselves to be called demons for millennia. It's just like now in the modern UFO abduction phenomenon. I know we're going to get there, but we'll call them aliens and they'll let us. We'll call them angels and they'll let us. We'll call them demons and they'll let us. There's no self-correcting mechanism here with respect to what we call them. But going back into the ancient texts, what we see is a narrative being written, and it consisted of people that were being born like us, humans. They were dying, and they were trying to hack immortality. And so James Frazier and another guy is James Frazier, Gerald Schroeder. A bunch of these individuals, one of them's an anthropologist, but he talks about the nature of possession and the role it plays in the afterlife. And this is a big behavioral pattern that really kind of launched my career in this field. Number one, he talks about how that there were people in the battlefield in antiquity, especially the late Iron Age, who, when they knew that they were going to die, they were stricken with a mortal blow, they would dispossess their own body and place their consciousness in another person. And so when I learned that, I started researching the nature of possession, the role it plays in the UFO abduction phenomenon, and how that possession was not just the relocation of consciousness, but it was an attempt at the replication of life. So I can't say it enough. If we're looking at possession through the ancient lens, because this is all about demonology, at least it shows you, then we have to realize that possession was not just the relocation of consciousness, it was a replication of life. Matter of fact, these entities that were once born began to evolve and possess statues and idols. Now, what's really interesting to me is that people, especially in the field of ufology, are very new to the understanding that consciousness was merged with metal and antiquity. Matter of fact, what was happening with these entities is that they were trying to self-replicate their species. And so they would go find a necromancer. And a necromancer would go find a corpse. And they would take the corpse up, they would place it in their house, and they would take a small piece of metal, and they would carve the name of an unclean spirit. In the Hebrew, it's tumarua. It's a deceased person. It's their consciousness. And they would carve that name onto the piece of metal and implant that piece of metal. I use that word with precision. They would implant that piece of metal into the body of another individual. And the consciousness of that deceased ghost or demon would then possess the body that that implant was in. And so that's just one motif that speaks to the fact that we are dealing with very ancient entities that are performing the same rites, rituals, and mechanisms that we've seen throughout history. It's only one strand. There's much more evidence.
Can you explain the reasoning to why someone would place a piece of metal in a deceased person and then have it, I guess, in a sense, possessed? Like, what was the purpose for that?
What they were doing is they're performing rituals that merge the consciousness of a ghost into the metal, with the metal. And so it wasn't just the consciousness, but the metal itself had consciousness in it. And then by implanting that into the body, somehow that through the metal, that entity would then take control over the body the implant is in. Again, this is another way of self-replicating their species. It's a ritual of possession, but in antiquity it was often employed as a form of necromancy. And so again, what these entities were doing, at least this is the theory in antiquity, was that they were trying to recreate a body for themselves to inhabit. Okay, so a lot of people have a kind of a confusion going on with the idea of a soul, and so what they do is they kind of project Greek mythology and then the body, soul, and spirit, the psyche. Well, in the ancient mind, you only had two souls. You had the nephesh, which was the exterior and interior soul. Hope you guys are following me with this. A lot of research, but so the soul was both the body and the apparition inside of it. What happened throughout history is that these entities that were dispossessed, that left their bodies, they were trying again to possess a new body. But again, it's very interesting that the body itself had to look like it, their own apparition. Okay, so I call these beings the molters, and what they would do again is they would possess a new body. But what's really interesting, I know you had another researcher that's evangelical talk about this, but there's a narrative called Genesis 6. And in this chapter, it speaks of these entities, but it talks about them. It's very interesting. It talks about them as apparitions. And so and literally in the King James Version, it says that they manifested two women in the images of their husbands. Okay. And so when I started researching that kind of case study, it was kind of ambiguous. And so what we demonologists started doing is we turned into moralists. Why were these entities so interested in women? Why were they so fascinated with childbearing and pregnancy? And it wasn't until I got a hold of what's called the Apocryphon of John. It's a Coptic manuscript preserved by Egyptian monks. It was a commentary on the Genesis 6 text. It goes a little bit deeper. This is going to be another narrative we'll see throughout the UFO abduction phenomenon. it says that these entities manifested to women in the images of their husbands. So, key point. Imagine a lady, a woman is at home, and an entity manifests to her in the image of either a husband or someone that she had a relationship with. The Apocrypha of John says that they then began to coerce her into a physical assault. During this physical assault, the woman thinks that this is her husband the whole time. It says that at the very end of the event, that they took seed that they had taken from a man, and they inseminated her and impregnated her. But at the moment of insemination, this text says that they reversed their apparitions to what they really looked like. Okay? It's a behavioral pattern all throughout UFO abduction phenomena. What they looked like was an apparition, and so what they performed is what's called an obstetric tradition in antiquity. And the idea was that whatever man the woman was focused upon at the moment of insemination, she will birth the material image of through her womb as a child. So what we have here is a text that is literally saying that there's an apparition that is creating a baby that's made in its own image. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so the text begins to describe what they would consider to be divination, or we would consider to be technology. Whatever it is the scenario of UFO abduction phenomenon, where these entities will literally manifest to a woman in the image of someone they had a relationship with or their husband, and then they will use that program to inseminate them with a child. This is, again, my whole point is it's not a modern phenomenon. This is very ancient stuff here, and it's been going on since forever. And I'll stop there because I don't know which direction you want me to go. I can go anywhere you want.
So for today's show, I came across, I had to do a lot of research because I'm not familiar with demonology. And I came across the incubus and the succubus. And from old witness accounts, in some respects, it almost sounds like a certain type of alien abduction, kind of like you were mentioning. So before we continue, what are the incubus and succubus for those that may not know? And do you believe there is a connection, or are they the exact same thing as alien abductions, just with a different label?
The latter. The latter. When we get into the incubi and succubi literature, it's very easy to discern what's going on. Like early demonologists consider these entities to be separate beings. And so the succubus entity, it originated from a Lil spirit, Lil. It's a Phoenician text. It's a mortuary text that describes the ghost of a person that leaves the body. And specifically, it was very interesting. Again, the ghost itself would use us to self-replicate it, to create a new body for itself. And so early on in Phoenician texts, we have the Lil spirits leaving the body at death and then collecting seed, I'll try to be PG-13, seed from either recently deceased men or living men. And then that entity, this is what I believe, this is what the data suggests, that same entity that collected the seed will then transform via technology or apparitional theory, who knows, but then it'll transform into a female. To a female. And so what we have here is very interesting. One entity collects the seed, right? That's the succubus. It's a female entity, collects the seed, and then the incubus is the male entity that goes and implants it. Now, I would like everybody to pay close attention to what I'm going to say here. We're not dealing with persons here. We're dealing with programs, okay? Literally, it's exactly like the UFO abduction phenomenon, but what's happened is that we've tried to limit this phenomenon to a certain period of time when it just doesn't fit that. It's far larger and far deeper. But the incubi and succubi phenomenon was quite literally designed to create a child in the womb, all right? And so what we had throughout history were moments which sound just like the UFO abduction phenomenon, where women will go to bed at nighttime and they will be induced into a dreamlike state. And at the time, they're being approached by an entity that looks like a husband or a man they've dated.
That's very interesting. Nathaniel, we're coming towards a break. We'll be right back after this.
Million gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, the X.
This is Micah Hanks of the Micah Hanks program right here on KUNX. And right now, you're having your paradigm shifted by the one and only Cristina Gomez.
Interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Cristina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time. It's new. It's the X.
Hi. This is Race Hobbs, head of programming at the new UNX Network, and you're locked on Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
I'm gonna
Welcome back. With me today is my guest, Nathaniel, the Demonologist. And we were going into detail about something quite fascinating, but you mentioned that there's also some data attached to it. Can you share that with us?
Absolutely. So what was happening throughout history, and this is in every religion, specifically focused on women. These entities would visit women either in their sleep or even in the daytime, and they would induce a sleep state, a dream state within them. And by doing so, literally, these women were being accosted by beings they did not know whether or not what they were experiencing was real. And so what was occurring is the next day, they would wake up and they would have bruises on their skin or scarifications. And the scarifications matched the assault that they thought was a dream. That's why the incubi and succubi were called nightmares, because a lot of these entities, again, it wasn't just that they attached to people at nighttime, but it was a manifestation of what the dream state was that they would induce people into. But this gets very deep very quickly, because again, what these entities, it's just like David Jacobs when he talks about, these entities will look into your eyes and they will hack the optic nerve. What these beings literally were doing is they were staring into the eyes of their victims. And I believe what they were doing is they were hacking what's called the frontal orbital media cortex. It's the part of our brain that decides whether or not what we're experiencing is real. Well, whatever happened to these individuals was real. And they were literally waking up with manifestations on their skin that originated in the so-called dream. So this is a very unique phenomenon. Again, let's take this apart real quick. These entities understand how to hack our beliefs. And we're just on the incubi and succubi case studies right now. They understand how to hack our memories. And they know how to hack our brain to the point where we do not know if reality is reality. And so is the dream state reality, because it seems like when we got back into our bodies or when we opened our eyes, it actually occurred to us. It was a physical and spiritual event. And so this incubi succubi phenomenon stretched its draconian shadow throughout history. It's cross-cultural, interreligious. And so what started happening in the 16th century is that these beings were visiting a province in Israel called Safdi. And so again, we had these women that were just, doing their daily lives, and they were being induced into a sleep dream state. Now, what's really interesting is the mutation here in the phenomenon, because not only were these women accosted and assaulted, and I'm being, kind of circling around an issue, read between the lines here, not only were they being accosted by these beings, but the next day they were waking up being possessed by the entity that had accosted them. Again, another motif. Okay? It's very interesting. And from that point on, these entities began to evolve quite rapidly. It wasn't just that they were possessing the women that they were impregnating, but now these women were suffering an unknown, unaccounted for pregnancy from these entities. Hello, UFO abduction. To the point that when they were possessed by the being, they would go to see the Kabbalistic exorcists, and they would be with child. The entity had cradled it. They said it moved itself into the fetal position, which led early demonologists to ask the profound question of whether or not the person was pregnant with or possessed by the entity itself. And so just with the missing fetus syndrome, these women would go throughout 2 or 3 months, and instantaneously, the possession's gone and the pregnancy's gone as well. So possession is a form of pregnancy to these entities.
My goodness. I've received a handful of comments on my social media that I should not be researching the UFO phenomenon because they are all demons and there's usually no room for negotiation.
Right.
With being in the field for 2 decades, what do you say to that statement? Are all alien abductions, the alien phenomena, are they all demons? Or is there room for negotiation?
I'll give it a little wiggle room. I'm not one of the dogmatists that I grew up hearing from and hearing about, right? Because I'm not one of those guys that say, okay, you can't research it. I'm researching it. Obviously, if I thought that, right, I wouldn't be. So, you know what I mean? It's a very interesting question. I don't believe that at all. Um, the thing is, and I think it goes even deeper. Are we being deceived by them, right? Are we studying deceit? Are they using people as propaganda, right? Experiencers and whatnot. What are they really wanting us to remember? And I think that goes back to the three kinds of knowledge. It's the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. Okay, and so do I study this? Absolutely. I will tell you that the victimology here isn't what a lot of people want it to be. I've done a lot of shows, and people like you, they'll message you, they'll PM you, you shouldn't touch this stuff. They're going to be attracted to you. Well, I think to a certain degree, but it's not like these guys are only abducting people who study abduction. It's not happening, right? So these guys, these individuals, whatever they are, the beings have a very unique victimology. I mean, they're abducting atheists, they're abducting theologians. They do not care. It's all across the board. And so I don't exactly know their victimology in terms of, okay, who we're going after and why are we doing it today and not yesterday. But I will say that in my own experience and pretty much in the other researchers I know, researching this phenomenon does not increase the probability of encountering it. But even then, are we, it's very interesting, are we reading propaganda? What do we trust about them? Are they wanting us to believe that if we study this, they'll be attracted to us? And maybe that's one of the reasons they don't want people to study it. So I don't know. But I'll tell you what, personally speaking, it hasn't attracted them to me at all. I mean, I find it fascinating.
Well, you definitely answered my next question. When
Okay.
you research this, do you attract these entities? And by your statement, it sounds like the answer is no. So my next question would be, where has this research taken you? And what I mean by that is, did your research take you in places that you didn't expect? And if so, where?
So it's really unique. I kind of abandoned the classical demonological explanation. Obviously, people think, if you get into the Vatican records, you get into Christianity, they believe these entities are fallen angels, horns and hooves. No doubt about it. We know for sure. What this led me, though, is into the afterlife and understanding the nature of the soul. Like I said early on in the interview, I do believe that many of these entities are disembodied. I believe that they are abducting bodies and they are abducting souls. And so what this really did is it pointed me in the direction of reimagining the afterlife, understanding, okay, why is it that they have a profound, intimate knowledge of the soul? And why is it that they're not really teaching us about it? Case in point, when I was studying demonology, I was going through the incubi and succubi phenomenon, and I was looking at these, what's called witch-era literature, and how it included what they would consider witches, whatever. They would say that at nighttime, these demons would visit witches, and then they would abduct the witch, and then they would replace her body with an apparition that looked just like her in the bed. They called it a familiar spirit. And so the husband would roll over at nighttime and think that's my wife, when secretly his wife had been stolen from him or abducted or kidnapped, if you want to be the Collins elite. And so that's when I started realizing that they understand that number one, they can abduct you and replace you in a way that no one else could possibly perceive. And so what I started realizing after reading that literature and pouring myself to the data in just demonological terms, they were describing the modern UFO abduction phenomenon. Matter of fact, case in point, Bob Luca woke up in the middle of the night to watch these entities peel Betty Luca's soul out of her body. Okay, it's very interesting. We've seen that kind of description all throughout history. But the problem that I have is this. Number one, there's nothing that can stop them. Number two, again, they have an intimate knowledge of the soul. I'm going to go deeper with this real quick. The problem with the field of ufology, especially with the abduction phenomenon, is that we have experiencers who can go through an entire abduction thinking that they're in their body, right? They're seeing with their eyes, hearing with their ears, and they're experiencing the world just like they would if they were abducted bodily. It's not until the end of the physical, the end of the abduction that they claim they become physical again. So what I'm suggesting here is that we need to look at the abduction phenomenon a little bit differently than before. Because if we have people that think they're on ships, but they're on ships out of body, then that's a whole another dimension of thought. But getting back into this direction of what I call the soul hunters, it's the same idea. A lot of the incubi texts suggest the same, that there are entities that have the ability to peel you out of yourself and without your permission. And so what I started doing when I didn't even know that existed. This is what I'm about to tell you is before I got a hold of some of these the OBE literature, NDE, near-death experience cases. Before all of that, I was researching texts in antiquity where people were encountering beings that would pull them out of their body and trigger by location. So much so that these victims, these individuals, would become self-seeing, where whatever these entities were, they would pull them out of their body and they would look down and their body is looking at them. And so I learned that behavioral pattern first in demonology. It wasn't until I got a hold of Betty Luca case studies, all these different abduction accounts, that I realized that, again, they're identical. And I don't want to be, okay, they're demons or whatever, whatever they are, they've been here for a long time and they have access to the soul. That's really where I'm at. And that's where my research is centered around now.
So, I would like to get your opinions and insights on Skinwalker Ranch in regards to the paranormal, such as disembodied voices, shadow people, creatures emerging out of portals, cattle mutilations, and UFOs. Just what is going on there, in your opinion?
Well, I think the biggest contribution the Skinwalker case study has given us is that it's merged two fields into one. A lot of researchers say that hauntology and ufology do not belong together or even the same sentence. I think they do, and I think that at least the Skinwalker case, NIDS and the other researchers have donned this new, it's the hitchhiker effect. Well, again, what they're doing is they understand, or at least they have proof, evidence of ufology being real and authentic. Now what they're doing is they're recording aspects of hauntings and what we would consider to be demonological manifestations. And I think that that's the biggest thing they've done for the field is that, they've looked at people and said, first of all, this is not just nuts and bolts. Second of all, these entities can possess you at will. And you asked me the big question earlier, if you get too deep into the research, will that draw them? Well, here's a case that, evidently it did for them. And I think that that's huge. We have researchers that went there. One was from the Pentagon. And he stayed there for a couple hours. On his way home, the entity, the manifestation, the phenomenon, tracked where his family lived, where he lived, and was already at the house before he got there. So I think that that's a hot spot for these beings. And I know that I would agree with Marzulli, respectfully, that it seems to be a portal. Absolutely. And I think that, but again, are they feeding us? Not NIDS, but are these beings letting us see just enough through the veil to mislead us? That's where we're at. But I do appreciate NIDS research. I think it's phenomenal. But I think that more than anything, what they've been able to do scientifically is say, hey, listen, science isn't fitting the bill here. There's hauntings going on here. There's possessions. And we as researchers need to, again, stop looking at it as a dichotomy. It is a duality. It's not this or that. It's this and that. They're one and the same. And we need to understand why they're using both fronts on us as a species.
This also makes me wonder about the many disappearances that are occurring in national forests and parks, as outlined by Dave Paulides in his Missing 411 series. Do you think there's a connection between demons, cryptids, and these mysterious disappearances?
I tend to, so like I said, I have an evangelical background. Doesn't mean I'm evangelical, but I have to make that clarification because there's a lot of people out there that have created their own fossil record and saying, okay, these are hybrid beings out there. And what they've done is they've misread steles. And so when you get into steles, you'll see Egyptian steles where you see a man that's half bird. Does it mean there was a half bird man out there? There's no fossil record for that. The reason there's no fossil record for that is because it didn't exist. What we are seeing is, again, our ancestors who are looking at emerging a phenomenon. So what they were doing is their cryptid version of the afterlife. Again, the Phoenician text, Mesopotamia, even the Egyptian version of the soul is that the soul was bird-like because it flew. And so when we have steles where you had a half man, half bird, they were literally referring to the afterlife. They were not referring to, cryptids and saying, okay, they were birdmen. That's one thing that we have to talk about. The other issue is this. I do believe with Paulides' work that we do have a lot of missing people that just, again, they go missing without explanation. But if we're dealing with bodily abduction, because we have bodily abductions occurring, then we also need to deal with people who we think are no longer here, but they've had their soul abducted. And I know this is going to be controversial. That's okay. We never started talking about physical abduction until we had people saying they were physically abducted. Let's use that same primer and say, okay, are there people that we think are missing, but they're not? They had their soul abducted. This is a very key point here, guys. They're not just the body, but they're doing that to the soul. And I want to go down a little path here because I know we have a little bit of, I don't know how much longer we have, but let's look at this aspect of it. When we're dealing with scarifications and the missing fetus syndrome and people that have gone missing in parks, like I said, there are people that are going out of body and in the body during their abduction, and they're confusing it. Okay, I'm going to give you something that I think is profound. And again, I have a lot of research, and I don't want to pig trail, but I have to tell you guys this. When they're abducting the soul and they're placing whatever we would call a soul back into the body, it is manifesting through the skin to the surface. Okay, this is what we would call witch marks, devil's marks, or whatever you want to call it throughout antiquity. This is the same phenomenon. I was working with the son of a remote viewer. And this individual is very interesting. He would go into trances. He would leave his body and he would meet these beings who he called his guides. And he said that when he would meet his guides, he would go back into his body, or whatever they would call become physical. He became physical again. And then he said that when he became physical again, these entities would carve amulets or scars and symbols into him to where it would manifest through the skin to the surface. Okay, so it was the soul first, the skin second. It's very important because I'm going to get back to Paulides here in a second. I promise. I'm not pig trailing. But this is also a manifestation of what we've seen in the UFO field. When Betty Luca got back into her body, Bob Luca said, through the skin, through the body, all that, her body began to manifest skin conditions, punch marks. And I'm afraid that what's happened, again, if we're just looking at bodily abduction, we're going to miss this motif in the field. That it was only after these people are getting back into their bodies that the skin is manifesting something that was done to the soul. I'm not just saying that. Let's go to Ian Stevenson's work. Ian Stevenson worked with individuals who believed they had past lives. These individuals, again, they had the death wounds they suffered from their previous body. That's what's going on. So whatever we're dealing with, again, it's not just bodily abduction. They're abducting the soul too. And I believe that a lot of these people who are going out and saying, I don't know why I have these scars on my body or scratches or whatever, I think a lot of times we're misidentifying it. And we're saying, okay, they were bodily abducted when in fact they weren't. These entities pulled their soul out. And just like all the other case studies with Ian Stevenson's work, with the remote viewer, Betty Luca, we're seeing the end result of it. And I think that's really troubling. And I think that, again, it's not just the bodily abduction we need to pay attention to. I think that there are dimensions of the afterlife disembodied consciousness that we're looking into as well.
Based on everything you're saying, abductions of people's souls, bodies being abused with physical injuries, and basically evil deeds. So where are the positive beings, the angels, so to speak, or God? How are things like this allowed to occur? I mean, surely these occurrences are breaking the rules of punching through into our realm and having
Right.
negative effects occur.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I will say this. There is a movement in the field that is silencing negative experiences. Um, and I know this because I've had them reach out to me. They originally wanted me to be a part of their study until I told them what I had experienced. And then they never emailed me back. They never allowed me in their documentary and all this. Very unique what's happening. But again, there is a threat narrative here that is disturbing. They're not asking our permissions to pull us out of our bodies, and it's happening. See, that's what I'm really disturbed by. And we're all, at least UFO Twitter, everybody's wondering, okay, are they demons or angels? Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, if we look at the case studies, like Dr. Carla Turner had a case where a woman, it was an incubi spirit, basically, or an incubi program where she's laying down trying to take a nap. These beings walk through the wall and they physically assault her. That's not an angel. But we won't hear that, right? It's not on, the internet. I mean, we're not, these people, again, there's a movement to silence experiencers if it does not fit the non-threat narrative. Okay. And I think that's why I know a lot of people, they kind of discount the Collins elite, but I think that we need to look at their research deeper, because I asked on Twitter, has anybody read what they read? And, they haven't, we haven't. And a lot of this stuff, it is troubling. I mean, we can go down a list of case studies where they're not knocking on our door to say, hey, listen, do you mind? Do you mind if I abduct your child? They're not doing that. And what the Collins elite realized, that's a whole other show, but the Collins elite realized that it really didn't matter how much information we get from them. It doesn't matter, doesn't matter if the invisible college is trying to reach them through esotericism and, we get a couple pennies out of it or get some kind of technology. What they realized after researching it was that these entities are allowing us to use them. Okay. Which means they have the ability to give consent to us. Let's switch it. Do we have the ability to give consent to them? Because what's been happening throughout history is they'll manifest to us in the image of a friend, in the image of a deceased loved one, in the image of Jesus, in the image of Muhammad. It doesn't matter to them. It's a program to them. I had a case study. A woman in India reached out to me. It was an incubi case. And she said that the entity kept putting her into a dream state and was manifesting to her in the images of every boyfriend she's ever had. I mean, the implications for us as a species is startling. Number one, they don't need our permission. Number two, they can step into our memories. And then when it's all said and done, we have to grapple with the trauma. We have to wonder, what did that really happen? Was that real, or did I dream that? And I think that if we're looking for a threat narrative, look no further. And also, even going deeper, if you go back into antiquity, we have people who were trying to access that next dimension. They were doing rituals or protocols, right? No, they were performing rituals. They would fast for 3 or 4 days. They wouldn't eat meat. They would do all kinds of stuff because they were trying to contact these beings, just like John D. and Edward Kelly. But the end result is these beings allow themselves to be used. Us, on the other hand, we don't have a choice in that. It's just occurring to us.
Nathaniel, we're coming towards a break. We'll be right back after this.
Your 1 million gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB. The X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Hi, Race Hobbs with the X. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you have an interest in unexplained phenomena like ghosts, Bigfoot, and UFOs. And by now, you know that we have our own X blog, the UnX newsletter, and the UnX magazine quarterly. But most of you don't know that we have started our very own paranormal conference. And this year, for safety, this 2-day XCon will be virtual, so you can attend from the comfort of your home. XCon presenters include Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, Margie Kay and Preston Dennett, Jimmy Church, Lisa Martin and Wayne Lawrence, Lee Spiegel, Debbie Zegelmeyer, Dan Terry, Kate Grabowski, and Ray Hernandez. There will also be a live paranormal investigation by the Riverside, Iowa Paranormal Team. So come hang out with us in the safety of home as we set out to explain the unexplained Friday, May 13th and Saturday the 14th, 2022. And tickets are on sale now. Go to unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com.
Are you ready to read about true paranormal events? UnX Media publishes non-fiction books about UFOs, ghosts and haunted places, time anomalies, cryptid creatures, and more. Just like KUNXDB Radio, it's all about unexplained phenomena. Visit www.unxmedia.com to see our list of great book titles by Debbie Zegelmeyer, Gene Walker, Devin Listrom, Wayne Lawrence, Bill Spicer, and yours truly, Margie Kay. That's unxmedia.com.
Gold loves chaos, uncertainty, and disarray. History shows us what gold does when people aren't sure about the government, the stock market, their jobs, or their retirement savings. Our national debt is skyrocketing. Gold and other precious metals are a defense measure against inflation and a stock market that might take years to recover. So what can you do right now to protect yourself? Call United Gold Group. We offer gold and other precious metals delivered securely within 72 hours. Are you worried about the stock market? We can also help you set up a real gold or silver IRA or a 401k. Safe and secure. United Gold Group makes gold ownership affordable. Call now and get up to $2,500 in free gold or silver with a qualified IRA. Call 800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534 or visit unitedgoldgroup.com.
Wondering, based on everything you're telling me, I'm really curious about the light side or defenders of humanity and human souls. I mean, are we just here as livestock to be farmed by these dark entities or demons, as you're calling them? I mean, where are the defenders, their counterparts who are here to keep the balance? You said we don't have a choice in the matter. So, who are
Yeah.
advocates from these other realms?
Well, I think that again, there's a lot of dogma and there's a lot of data. I know people that have said, during their abduction, they've called on Jesus and the abduction stops. I also know a woman who Jesus appeared to her and said, "All of your children are mine. They belong to me." And during her abductions, she had missing pregnancies, and it took them. So again, we need to start looking at this to the idea of, what, like you're asking, what can we do to stop it? The dogmatists want me to be strictly religious and say, man, you just got to utter this word and it works. It doesn't. Okay. And if you have people that say that, but they're not the majority. I mean, we have case study after case study after case study where Jesus manifests, and it's never the rabbi Jesus. It's not the first century historical version. It's, whatever Westerners would consider him to be. It's the white, blonde-haired Presbyterian version of Jesus, right? It's whatever fits the belief system of the experiencer. In addition to that, there is an effort in ufology to reinterpret the phenomenon, reinterpret the experience. I'm sorry. When you physically assault a woman and impregnate her without her permission, that's not a good thing. There's no, oh my God, you know what? Let me say this. You agreed to that prior to being born. Really? What? Because if that's the idea, what's to stop someone to do that again, from doing that to her again, and then going to her and using that same gaslighting technique? Well, you agreed to it. When did you agree to it? Well, it's a part of you that you don't know. That's what agreed to this. So again, this negative aspect is we cannot escape it. And so getting into this idea of the hunting the souls and whatnot, it really doesn't matter to me. Okay, people are gonna say, well, what is the soul? Well, according to antiquity, the soul, prior to the Greek mythologists, yeah, it was the body or the interior soul or the apparition. But they're doing this without our permission, and in many cases, without our awareness. We're getting into Casey and Carla Turner. They had no idea until they started suffering PTSD, until their body literally started to break down fiber by fiber. And they had to go to a therapist. And that's when they realized that, hey, listen, the PTSD is connected to trauma. And so I can't stress that enough, guys. As a field, we need to embrace these negative accounts. I'm not saying I'm going to use that, say, oh my God, these are all demons. But I'm certainly not going to say that angels are going to go out there and tell somebody they're going to take all their babies. I'm certainly not going to say that, listen, there's an entity out there that if you call on their name, they're just going to stop everything and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's not happening. It's not. It's quite even the opposite. If you give them a name, they'll step into the image. Okay, Dr. Carla Turner had a case study. Ted Rice, he was a remote viewer, psychic. See, we gotta figure out what we're dealing with here. He was going in and out of trances, and he was getting messages just like the remote viewer I was working with. Then he was abducted, and he thought they were his guides. Okay, so again, look what's happening. He thought he was using them. They were using him. And then in the abduction account, he's with his grandmother, and this entity approaches her and tries to breed, tries to, create a situation where he can assault her and impregnate her. She looks at him, the vicinity, and says, I've only been with one man. It's my husband. I've only known one man in my lifetime. And instantly, this entity plucked the image she had of her husband, the memory of her husband. When she closed her eyes, she said, hey, this is what I remember my husband looking like. And then they created the image of the husband. From the shadows emerges It's me, honey. It's just me. Everything's good. Go ahead and do this, right? And again, what happened is she looked at him and said, I know you're not my husband, and I'm not doing this. But if you go back to the Apocrypha of John in the late Iron Age, what did they do, right? I'm getting passionate now. Sorry, guys. What they did is they appeared to the individual according to as a program, literally a program of deceit. This even gets back into the witch era literature in the Middle Ages. Witches were being, again, plucked out of the bed at nighttime. They thought that they were copulating with demons and corpses. Okay? And then somehow, during the event, the frequency fuzzed in and out. And then what they thought was a demon, what they thought was a corpse, was actually metallic objects that were inseminating them and then harvesting things from their bodies. So the idea that, okay, demons or that these are something else, I think, again, we've got to start looking deeper into this. What if they're neither demons, and what if they're not even aliens? What if these are archetypes that they're allowing us to believe in as long as we don't understand the truth? That's where I'm at with it. That's my rant.
Again, you mentioned metallic objects, and wow, I mean, this is beginning to sound like an AI nightmare, like the Matrix. Now, Nathaniel, I've got to believe there are two sides to this, not just mentions of types of Jesus, but
Right.
who are the counterparts of the demons, like literal angels such as Michael, Gabriel, and others. Or is this more like a battle of dimensions? Have you come across references or examples of what we would call supernatural entities who are there fighting a war with these demons?
Not in the middle of UFO abductions. I haven't found that literature. I mean, there's not a case study where, okay, you have a bad guy in an abduction and a good guy, and they go to battle for you, and then the abduction stops. The data does say that we do have people that have claimed, okay, Jesus or Muhammad, and then something or whatever, something steps in. But it's always like, okay, I said this, and then it stopped or they left. That's what the data says. Again, it's whatever. If there is something that's good, then we have to assume that they're allowing this to occur. Okay, this gets very philosophical very quickly. Then we have to assume that there are some abductions that they're allowing to happen and other abductions that they're not. And the abductions that they are allowing to happen, they're pretty bad sometimes. They're not just, hey, listen, it's Cool Whip, jelly beans, and gummy bears, and pat on the back, see ya. It's literally the person's like, I don't even understand this world anymore, and they just never want to talk about it. So as a researcher, most of the time, it's quite literally, okay. I mean, how about this? Dr. Carla Turner had a case study where these entities will just step into roles that we give them. One man who was abducted asked the entity, "Are you an angel?" And the entity said, "Sure, but not like you've been taught." Right? So these entities have told us they're angels. They've told us they're demons. They've told us that they're deceased people. Right? They've told us they're corpses. They've told us a lot. And the scary thing is if there is a good, at least a decision maker to this, then we can't just pay attention to when it does work. We have to ask our questions why it doesn't. And if there is, why are they allowing this to happen? And I know that especially being a demonologist, there are a lot of people that say, okay, the kind of doctor today say, well, I have plenty of case studies that say when somebody claims this or calls out on this name that the abduction stops. That's fine. I'm not denying that. What I'm also saying that is, if I was a doctor, I wouldn't usually prescribe that, because if it works 20% of the time, that's so it's inconclusive. But I will suggest that it's like Lou said. Maybe our interpretation of history is not really accurate. Maybe that's the somber moment. Maybe that's I don't know.
Getting back to Dave Paulides, because we didn't nail that down.
Yeah.
Is it something like body and soul being taken maybe into portals by these entities. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on the missing 411 cases?
Well, it's interesting because it seems like these people are gone missing and they're never returned, right? They're just gone. Um, it's very interesting because when we're dealing with portals, we get into how we would perceive a lot of these UFOs. We have a lot of accounts where abductees they think they're on a UFO, but it is very much a portal in the sense that the UFO looks to be 50 feet wide, and once they get into it, right, it's like 2 or 3 football fields. And so, if we look at UFOs being as portals, or even if we look at Paulides' work as abduction accounts, then absolutely they're taking somewhere else. And this is a theory that I've been working on personally: is that if you're a goldfish and somebody sticks a finger in water, you only see that portion that's in that dimension, right? And so a lot of these people are being abducted, but it's almost like once they get into that finger in the water, they realize, hey, this stretches out. This is not just a crack, this is a dimension shift. And so the most interesting thing about that phenomenon is that they're never returned. The question is begged, then are these people deceased or are they still alive? Let's go even deeper. If they can sustain the body, then can they sustain the soul out of body? Because clearly they can during abductions. Betty Luca's body was in bed, but they had captured her apparition, her soul, whatever you want to call it. Her body was kept alive, and so was her soul. So if they are somewhere else, what are they doing with them? But I think it's a disturbing case study, and I love Paulides. I mean, who does? He's an incredible researcher. But it's really disturbing because there's a lot of people that, let's just say they were abducted in Paulides' work, that have never been able to tell their stories. That's the most disturbing aspect of it.
A lot of what you've been telling me reminds me of my interview with Whitley Strieber and his references to seeing small blue creatures, and that some of the encounters with aliens also involve the spirits of those who have passed, even family members. What are your thoughts on his years and years of encounters?
I love Whitley. So I think that, again, we're dealing with beings that are in what we would consider to be the afterlife. It's the same things the Collins elite believe. And what a lot of people do is they'll point at Collins elite and say, well, you know what? You guys are just Christian. That's, this version of the afterlife is not Christian. You won't find it in any scholarship. Usually it's, hell or Hades, whatever they're in. Again, they have the ability to maintain consciousness out of the body. But I want to dive into something real quick because I know we have a little bit more time, but I want to throw something out there. We know for sure that people are being abducted bodily because we have people saying, hey, listen, right, I have scarifications. They did tests on me and all this. If they can abduct the body and never return it, can they abduct the soul and do the same? Because I believe, and I have evidence suggesting that our mortuary rites throughout history were influenced by soulish abductions, to the point where there are texts that literally, when they say, there's one case in an Akkadian text where a guy tells a sister, if my soul leaves my body, right? If these entities take me, it's very interesting too. These entities were called, they're not just soul hunters, but they were called snares of the fowler in Psalms 91. But it's a reference to that soulish dimension that exists in all of us. And my question to researchers is, I know people are going to hate on me and stuff, but I think it follows logic here to ask the question, are there people that we think are dead, but their souls aren't? That we've buried them, but these entities have captured their souls. Why? It's not just that we have evidence of them being witnessed in abduction accounts, but we even have evidence of again, the teraphim phenomenon, where these beings have merged consciousness or the soul with metal. We have abductees, documented accounts where they say, listen, I got on the ship and the ship itself was alive, right? So I think that's where my research is heading, and I think that's it's very interesting. But again, if they can abduct the body and never return it, then I believe they can abduct the soul and never return it. And that's even a darker scenario than I think a lot of us would want to research.
What insights do you have in regards to what happens right after the process of death? I mean, you close your eyes here and then open your proverbial ghost eyes in the ghost dimension. From your research, what happens next?
I wouldn't claim to know. I don't know. I know that there's evidence that suggests that there is a disembodied life force that exists. I know through my own case studies dealing with entities that are disembodied. I don't know what dimension they're in, and I'm not going to claim I know what all of their values are. I do believe that this phenomenon has given us insight into the possibility that we experience out of body reality just like we do when we're in the body. So much so that a lot of experiencers, they're thinking, man, I'm in the body the whole time. And then it was only at the end of the experience, I became physical. That means I wasn't the entire time. But I don't know what a good person or a bad person would experience at death. I know that the text and antiquity teach us that these beings have what's called the disability of being, where there's some kind of independence, where they're not in one body at a time. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But I'm not going to claim to know the afterlife, but I will suggest that far more than nuts and bolts, the phenomenon is pointing in the direction of these beings being disembodied and of their interest in us being disembodied as well.
One thing I've had people ask me about is about Aleister Crowley and the demon he conjured called Lamb. Some say it looks like a gray alien than maybe what people depict as a demon. Can you walk us through the story of this demon?
Yeah, so see, he performed a ritual and this entity manifested to him. It's important to realize that Crowley's work was deeply rooted in Kabbalistic texts that were designed to conjure angels. Again, we're seeing this. They'll play the role of whatever you want them to be. It's an angel. They'll respond just like they did to him as an angel. And so his research and his rituals they came out of Kabbalistic texts. One of his favorite authors was Eliphas Levi. Eliphas Levi was a Kabbalistic magician. And even before that, Eliphas Levi's hero was Abramelin the mage. Now, the reason I'm making this point is because when you're getting into the research of Crowley, then you've got to get to his protege, Jack Parsons. Okay, it's very important. If we validate Parsons' research, if in fact there are individuals in the Invisible College who are using Jack Parsons' technique, you cannot validate Jack Parsons or even Crowley as a man without validating his methods. In Crowley's work and Parsons, both of their methodologies were rooted in esotericism and conjuring these entities. The Collins elite knew this. I also believe that the Invisible College is tapping into this, thinking, oh my God, we're going to get technology. But Crowley was being used too. It wasn't just, okay, I'm going to go conjure this entity and I'm going to have a drawing. No, he was using something. And the key point in all of this research, as far as using esotericism to contact a phenomenon, is that, yes, you'll have access to them with their permission, just like Crowley did. There will come a time, and it's happened in almost every account throughout history, where when they're done being used, and now they want to use you. And when they want to use you, it will be without your permission. That's what Crowley's work speaks about to me the most. It speaks of the species, human species, and the human condition, yearning for that next dimension of love, acceptance, and transcendence, not realizing, hey, there is something that goes bump in the night, and it's larger, it's bigger.
So it's kind of like they want to take without giving in return. You briefly touched on the American chemist and magician Jack Parsons. Can you go into a bit more detail of who he was, and did he find a connection between demons and UFOs?
Yes, he did, in the sense that he performed his rituals and he would go into trances, into alternate states of consciousness, and receive instructions and revelation. So he was one of the founders of our rocketry, um, I guess, inventions. He was a rocketeer, man. He was a rocket scientist. But that's how he accessed the phenomenon. He would perform certain rituals, and a lot of times Crowley would warn him, that you don't know them like I do. They don't know you like they know me, and the danger that was professed to him over and over again. This is Jack Parsons. Was, listen, there's a possibility you can open a door that you can't shut, and if you do open that portal, then things can come through. Now, that's an interesting hypothesis, but I think it also is very interesting because there's what I call the mortal portal. And that's the idea that these entities, they will manifest. They'll use us to manifest into this dimension. And how about this? Jack Parsons was using kind of rehashed rituals that he inherited from Crowley's work. A lot of these rituals were bastardized from Hebrew magicians, Jewish Kabbalistic magicians. And what they were doing is they were doing what's called sympathetic magic, where they would do the same ritual, they would do it a little bit different. And these entities would manifest. But I think, again, that points to the danger that all of us have when we go out of our way to contact the phenomenon. And I don't want to push any buttons here, but the idea of CE5 is, listen, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to draw them to me. Well, who drew who here? How do you know that they didn't draw you? How do you know they're not just waiting? And it points back to the phenomenon presenting itself in the image of whatever we want it to be. And I'm not the only researcher that believes that. There's other researchers that I won't mention here, but it is a common thematic element.
That is a very interesting way to look at CE5. I mean, that's new to me and something definitely worth considering. Nathaniel, this show has flown by so quickly.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online to keep up to date with your research?
I'm on all social media. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and now I'm on Twitter. I'm not a big fan of Twitter. Okay. All right. I don't get into all the drama. And so I don't have a lot of followers on Twitter, whatever. But yeah, I have a YouTube channel, and that's where you can find me. My name's Nathaniel Gillis. And thank you for having me on. It was a humbling experience. And I really hope that people, if they don't like stuff, ignore it, get to the meat, throw out the bones. How about that?
I'm all for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
It was such a pleasure and eye-opener to speak with Nathaniel on his insights on the connection between demonology and the UFO abduction. It once again seems that if we remove the labels and the bias, a lot of these ancient stories and different phenomena could very well be the same, or at least similar in nature. The more people that I've spoken to for both shifting the paradigm and in private, the more we are realizing there is a convergence between the paranormal and the UFO phenomena. These are exciting times to do this research because now more than ever, we have the information right at our fingertips. And it is through talking about it in podcasts, videos, books, and articles can we share our limited knowledge to the world. Look, nobody has all the answers. If anyone tells you they have the answers, they're lying. We can either research until we pass over or until we feel satisfied with the answers that we've collected. But it seems that most researchers, the more they research, the less they know. And I didn't understand that until I witnessed it for myself. All of the ideas that I had of what this phenomenon is has just been crushed over and over again. But only through this can we remove our preconceived ideas on what we think everything is based on our very limited knowledge. And this is a beautiful field to be a part of. There's always something new to learn every single day. And that's what I love so much about this field. I would like to mention that my new show, Strange Paradigms, will be airing every Friday at 3 p.m. PST, where I cover paranormal and mysterious news items of the week, sometimes on my own and other times with a guest co host. So make sure to ring the notification bell if you are watching this on YouTube. Also, take a look at my website called strangeparadigms.com, where you can catch all of my shows in video and podcast format, along with blog postings, guest appearances, and contact information. I want to wish you all a wonderful week. Please like this video or podcast on your platform of choice and share it with those who have the same interest. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more great shows coming to you soon. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.